So here's the other thing that kind of blew my mind when I was reading the details was,
Yeah.
at one point they try to knock out before they go into the forest. At the park, they slam Payton's head into the concrete to try to knock her out. And like you would think at that point, like play date is over. Like, all right, I'm gonna go home. You two just try to break my head open. But no. They still, and that's where I gotta wonder, like, poor Payton.
Welcome. You are listening to the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 19. My name is Juras, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Glenn. How are you, man?
Doing all right. Staying busy in the holidays and ready to talk about crazy people doing crazy things.
Of course. I mean, this case that we're going to be discussing is one of the craziest things I have heard, especially in, I guess, recent years. Without any further ado, today we will be talking about, I'm not sure how to word it, but I guess the Slender Man killings, or the Slender Man killing attempts. How would you describe this case?
Yeah, Wikipedia calls it the Slender Man Stabbing, so I'll go with that. It was they tried to kill somebody, but it didn't quite work.
Exactly. So, on the May 31st of 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I probably butchered that name. Is it Waukesha? Waukesha?
Yeah, I want to say I'm gonna make fun of their pronunciation up there too, the way they say the name of their state. I'm gonna say Waukesha, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, yeah. So that's maybe we'll get a little hate mail for that later for making fun of the way they pronounce their state name.
I mean, Wisconsin, I don't really much know about Wisconsin. It's probably one of the, I guess, states that doesn't get that much attention. At least I'm assuming, right? It's not the biggest state in the U.S. It's I feel like it's on the lower end in terms of the population, right?
Yeah, I think it's like one of those kind of like agriculture, and I think they're known for dairy specifically. A big state that was kind of settled a little later in our history, had like a big influx of immigrants from like Germany and Poland and other parts of Central Europe, like probably in the 19th century, and is known for being a fairly safe place to live, low crime rate. In fact, this town, Waukesha, had only averaged about one murder a year, and I have the feeling probably those murders were like domestic events gone wrong. They were actually, when the thing that happened, they were all shocked. The cops were shocked. Even the dispatcher was like, "Someone's been stabbed." Yeah. I can't believe it, which is the total opposite of like where I live, where about every minute something is happening, some part of the city.
Yeah, I mean, smaller towns do tend to have, I guess, less of a crime rate, but once, I guess, crime does happen, it usually is some really messed up crap. You know what I'm saying? At least that's what I'm getting from all of the episodes that we are doing at this point. And I guess to give the brief rundown of the, Slender Man Stabbing. So 2 12-year-old, I guess, girls had lured a friend of theirs into the woods and then stabbed that friend 19 times. And this is where the case gets crazy. The reason they stabbed her friend 19 times was to apparently appease Slender Man, and so they could essentially become his praxis. And the victim crawled to a road where she was found eventually, and she managed to recover after 6 days in the hospital. So even though she was stabbed 19 times, she managed to survive. So that's always great to hear that. I guess I feel like this is the first case where we are discussing a stabbing or an attempted murder, but the victim actually makes it out alive. So that's interesting, right? Because getting stabbed 19 times and surviving, I don't really get how you could do that, but I haven't really looked into the way the girl was stabbed, but I guess the stabs were not fatal. And I feel like the stabs from 12-year-old girls, just me being stereotypical here, but I feel like those type of stabs don't really go that deep into the skin, so it only penetrates not that much in terms of how far you cut that person. So I guess none of the fatal organs got penetrated. I feel like that was the case, and the victim survived. So I guess before we get into the people involved in the Slender Man stabbing, what is your initial take on the case? Have you been shocked when you started researching it, or what is your mindset in terms of just going forward with the story?
Yeah, so I remember when it happened, and I remember.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, where it'll be an interesting kind of comparison in the age difference between you and me, where I was like, what is Slender Man? What are they talking about? I don't even know what they're referring to. That they would be willing to commit a murder for this. And it's interesting that when you actually look at the severity of the injuries, they actually came really close to killing her. Apparently one of the stabs was deep through her chest where it missed her heart by a millimeter. Yet somehow this the victim was able to go home from the hospital 6 days later.
Yeah, I did not get that. I mean, 19 stabs.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like if you're going to survive that, you're gonna have some sort of you know what I'm saying, dysfunction in your body for the rest of your life. But the victim has actually spoken out fairly recently on multiple news media outlets, and to me she seemed normal. I didn't really get that sense that she was obviously she will have that psychological trauma for the rest of her life. I mean, I don't know what that type of situation does to a person's mindset, but physically she seemed not like something you would expect after getting stabbed 19 times.
Yeah, she one of the quotes I saw in an article was saying that if she met one of her oppressors again, she would actually thank them, because apparently she's taken an interest in the medical field because of the ordeal she's been through, which is interesting. I mean, it's a little bit inspirational, but yeah, it's still. Another article did mention that she's still, the whole family has had to go through therapy because of the PTSD she's been through. So just specifically talking about Slender Man for a second. Yeah. So, as I understand it, just from the research, this was apparently the result of a photo shopping contest that Something Awful, which, gosh, that site goes way back to the early days of the internet, kind of the golden era of the internet. So there was some kind of weird contest to make weird pictures and then caption them and figure out stories behind them. And apparently from that, it was so popular that people started making these creepypasta fiction stories around the character. Is that I think you probably know a lot more about this than I do, having been a lot closer to the ages of
once I didn't find out about Slender Man from this case in particular, because Slender Man was a fairly popular character in many like horror games, I believe back in like 2013 up to like 2016-ish. The whole Slender Man, I guess, sort of phenomenon has died down over like the last few years, because it's not as relevant as it once was. But there were like, I'm just gonna quickly bring up like some video games, because I guess images, right? So from what you are seeing right now on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see like a picture from a video game. So I don't know what this video game is called, but it was probably one of the most, I guess, famous video games involving Slender Man. And I guess the whole pretext of what you actually do in this game is you basically find yourself in the middle of the forest, and you have a flashlight, and you're just moving through the forest, and you're sort of waving your flashlight all around, I guess, the forest, and you're trying to make it to the end of the forest, and you're trying to dodge the Slender Man. And once you actually find the Slender Man with a flashlight, then you need to start running away from it. So it's a scary game, I guess. It's the engine for the game is fairly simple. There's nothing like complex involved. So a lot of other similar video games have been made just because of the fact of how easy it is actually to make a Slenderman game, especially nowadays. So yeah, I guess that's how the Slenderman phenomenon got so crazy. And yeah, I mean, probably if something like that was happening as we speak, like right now, when I'm a little bit older, 24 years of age, I would probably not, the Slenderman would probably not be on my radar right now. But back when I was, in my I guess late teens, then I was still aware of it. So just to give some context, it was a big thing, especially for like 12-year-olds at that time. Everyone knew about it. So yeah, that's like, I guess, my take, just to give you some context on the Slenderman.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like it's something that was a lot more for like, I guess what we sometimes term millennials or Gen Y and maybe Gen Z, in terms of like the age groups. And yeah, for me, I mean, it was completely off my radar when I heard.
I'm sure. I mean, I bet for like most people, your age, like no one really looks into this type of.
We were watching like Sopranos and other stuff, and yeah, I mean, it was even after Sopranos. Yeah, so it was just different age group, different stuff going on. But I mean, it's kind of cool. I mean, it's interesting. I was trying to think if there was anything analogous to this when I was a kid, but I feel like it was all stuff that was like, I guess it's not really so silly when you think of like horror movies from the 80s, where like it was like, Jason and Freddy and all that stuff, where it's like, that's basically the same kind of thing, just one had a lot more money behind it and the other one was manufactured by the community, and maybe there's more to credit about it. It is interesting that it got into the realm of starting a kind of a moral panic.
Yeah.
When people started, kind of criticizing, well, like, why are children reading this? But then when you look historically, children have always been exposed to some kind of content like this. I mean, especially if you just look at like the Grimm's fairy tales, those things, the originals are horrifying from a politically correct perspective. I mean, some of them are they're like anti-Semitic. Some of them are like incestuous. There's like violence by children, violence against children, violence against parents. There's a whole other road you can go down on that. But yeah, so it's
not something like, you want your kid to like be exposed to, right?
Yeah, but yet it's always been, part of. I mean, at least you and I share a European cultural heritage, in our past, and that it always has been apparently something that's been, part of that heritage is telling stories like that to children. So I guess it's not so unusual. So it's worth kind of going into. I guess our suspects then, or our cast of characters.
Yeah, I mean, before we actually do that, you mentioned like the Photoshop contest. The thing that sort of gave birth to, I guess, the phenomenon of Slender Man. So I'm assuming this is what you were discussing, because I have not heard about the Photoshop contest. I mean, this is like some research that you did like on the back end. So yeah, I guess, for everyone who is watching this on YouTube, you could actually see the picture that is Photoshop, and as you can see, it's like just a bunch of kids playing around, and there is this like creepy tall figure photoshopped at just behind this tree right here. So I guess these types of, and once again you can see like a Slender Man. So it has to do something with like kids, like he's always being photoshopped behind kids, or like hanging around with kids. So yeah, that's interesting.
There was like apparently those early attempts, I guess, for that contest, when people started trying to make little captions and things, they would kind of basically imply that it was some kind of paranormal or supernatural force that was driving kids to do crimes or evil things, but also abducting them. It was just some whole thing, like, I don't know. It was almost, I mean, if you wanted to look at it from a religious or a theological point of view, you can almost say, well, like that's Satan, that's the devil, that's the devil bringing, luring over and entrapping souls of children and getting them to comply through,
I mean, maybe
spiritual extortion.
Maybe that's what actually happened. This is, I guess, this is the mystery for this case.
So
yeah.
It's interesting because in our cast of characters here, apparently, out of the three young ladies we're going to talk about today, the victim, Payton Leutner, she was the one who didn't like to read these stories. She thought they were too scary. She was disturbed by them. She also probably, based on the research that we've done, was the least insane of them. It doesn't actually sound like she had any mental issues, other than maybe she had the misfortune to have been best friends with one of the main suspects, Morgan Geyser. They had been best friends since, I think, 4th grade was what I read. And that friendship had persisted, but it was actually, and there's Morgan, Morgan. So, but it was actually Anissa, Weier, who introduced Morgan to these stories. So apparently, she found the stories first. She thought they were spooky, and so here's where we can start getting into. I kind of debated with myself when to get into the mental state of these folks, because we do have a lot to cover.
Of course.
But I want to try to frame it right, because otherwise it looks, there's a big debate about whether people that do things that are mentally ill, how much responsibility they bear, and whether their actions are evil or immoral, or how much responsibility can be attributed to them given some kind of mental distress. And in this case, there's a lot of like she said, where like the suspects are kind of pointing at each other, and their supporters are kind of saying, well, like, oh, it was all her idea, and this other one was like the sheep, the lamb that went along with it, and then like the other family says the other thing. So
as you do, you're trying to make sure your kid gets out as soon as possible, right?
Yeah, it's always someone else's fault. Which, okay, so to frame this right, it's interesting. To give some background, essentially both of these suspects have been diagnosed by various psychiatrists as either being schizophrenic, or in the case of Morgan Geyser, that she just has full-blown schizophrenia. And I think that the evidence is pretty good that is very much true.
Yep.
She may actually be one of those unfortunate individuals who had it even from an extremely young age, and it just wasn't that obvious. And then Anissa, the other suspect, or in this case convicted person, she has something that has been labeled as a schizotypal personality disorder, which is like, it's sort of like close to schizophrenia but not quite. So there's some similarities, but I think it's missing potentially like the hallucinations you can have, the delusions. So real quick, for any of our listeners and viewers who don't know what schizophrenia is a mental illness that they think is biological. They're not entirely sure what causes it. They think it might be a combination of genes because it does seem like it does run in families, not always. They think it may have to do with potential infections or sicknesses one had either in utero or as a young child. Mm-hmm. It may also have to do with like neglected parents. There were a lot of fingers pointed. It's interesting, like in the old days, they used to actually blame it on bad parenting. They used to say that, oh, you're a schizophrenic child, it's because you messed up as a parent, but they're not. That was
crazy, right? That's crazy to blame the parents for something that's biological, I guess.
Right.
It could not have been changed, right?
I mean, especially given all the bad parenting that's out there. I mean, can you imagine being one of those parents where like you did maybe one thing wrong or like one thing like not so well, and everyone's like, it's your fault, your child's schizophrenic. You're like, well, what about those people that drink and beat their kids all day? Their kids aren't schizophrenic.
And the funny thing is, I feel like those types of kids that grow up in like those crazy environments, I mean, sometimes they actually they look back at that situation and it sort of motivates them to become like a really successful person or something like that. So actually it's like a sometimes like the opposite is true, like
the opposite.
Like bad parents actually raise amazing people.
Yeah, exactly. It's like makes them determined never to be like that. So in the case of Morgan specifically, here's the thing. She didn't know it, but her father had actually been diagnosed with schizophrenia some years before. Her parents had never revealed it to her at first because she was too young, and I guess they weren't really sure how to position it. It sounds like they missed the clues, and I have a little bit of a spiel to go on, but before I do, I'll just go into the clues. So the clues were, to hear Morgan tell it, she had apparently been experiencing hallucinations and delusions from a young age, and this is the young age part is not so typical for schizophrenia, but the delusions and hallucinations are certainly a part of schizophrenia, where that's one of the problems sometimes, is that the person starts to have maybe invasive ideas. They start to see things that are not real. Sometimes they have some of the same problems that people with autism or Asperger's have, where this is where sometimes it's hard to diagnose between the two of them, because sometimes like things like not wanting to speak out, having social anxiety, not understanding or interpreting social cues properly, so essentially not coming to the right conclusions in social situations, and where a child without that or adult without that would have, and then it eventually progressively can get worse, and there's even different flavors of this. There's some great YouTube videos, by the way, for anyone doing research. There's one where I have to look up the kind of it. There's one kind where the person just basically is completely subdued and just barely moves, sometimes in weird positions. There's one of the most dangerous kinds is paranoid schizophrenia, because paranoid people tend to actually
act out,
be very suspicious. There's ideas. They feel like they're in danger. They feel like everyone's against them, and often they are the most motivated to do something in a way where, like, if garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not thinking properly, your actions and results to thinking may not work. So the one thing I find really interesting is generally schizophrenia is not diagnosed. It's thought to not really emerge generally until like maybe right around age 16 to 18, early 20s. Now the bone I have to pick with that is, I was talking about this actually at dinner with my parents and my wife. We were talking about how we're going to do this show tonight. So sometimes I think that maybe the issue is, and this seems to be the case with Morgan, is that sometimes parents and adults don't really take children that seriously when they start to do things that are odd, because they're so used to children having strange ideas and having an incomplete concept of how the world works. And that, and true enough, like I can certainly think of weird and strange ideas and notions that I had up until like maybe my early teens, that like once I hit my teens and I'm like, oh my God, that was, I want to cringe right now thinking about what I thought was appropriate. But
exactly, right. Same here. Like even like, like 5 years ago, I was like thinking like of some really like cringy stuff. Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to give a real quick example from my past. When I was in Boy Scouts, there was a kid who joined our troop, and it was very obvious to us, us young teens. So we're all between the ages of like 10 to 15, let's say. Most of us, and this kid joined the troop, and he was, to be fair, he was from another country, which is not that unusual, and I think some amount of his behavior was blamed by the adults as being kind of like a culture shock. That being said, his parents and his little sister didn't seem to have that culture shock, so we weren't really buying it. And I'll tell you, the behavior was almost classic schizophrenia, where it was like flat affect. So flat affect, case in point, flat affect means the person doesn't really seem to be reacting with any kind of real emotion. It doesn't really seem like they're all there. And I would say that's probably because, frankly, from their point of view, you aren't really real. Like, reality isn't real. Like, they're not really sure what is real, and they may think that their hallucinations or their delusions are real. And sometimes it's interesting thing is later on, when Morgan was institutionalized after this case, she wasn't even recognizing her parents. So they realized that like people's faces were actually changing in front of her so often that like she, if she didn't see the same weird face, it was like you start to actually.
I do not actually know about this. So
weird?
Just a quick question, just to make sure I have everything set up correct. So these, if you're watching this on YouTube, these are like the Morgan's parents, right? I believe. Or are these Anissa's parents? Because I could.
Might be Anissa's, yeah, because her mom looks a lot like her, and that doesn't look like her so much.
Yeah, I mean, anyways, like. Yeah, this looks like Anissa's parents. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty odd because it's interesting. So like the flat affect thing, that was one. But this kid, let me just say, this kid was doing things like social cues. Case in point, social cues were doing. The kid was doing things that like a younger kid would know better than to do to an older kid. Like you would know that would either get your butt kicked or get some kind of social sanction. And like I said, it was written off at the time by the adults as like, culture shock and just adjusting, and maybe he's just an eccentric kid. But like, this is the thing that I think I have a pet peeve about, where like sometimes the adults are in denial about things. So I was actually asking my dad, because my dad was one of the assistant scoutmasters. He was there. He was there from when it all happened. I was like, did you guys like realize this? Because all of us kids were like, excuse me, something's wrong here. Like, this kid is off. And I mean, there were a couple different things I can mention. I won't go too in depth. They were just okay, but the kid was already acting pretty weird and acting just like disconnected and not meshing, and we're all like okay, something's wrong. And then this kid did some things, including at summer camp. He did some really wacky stuff that was just off the wall. Like, okay, this kid's gone, and like the kids, they weren't reacting. I'll tell you, this kid was even in the car with me and my dad when we had to do a scouting activity. We're trying to drop him off. He couldn't remember where he lived, dude. He couldn't remember where he lived, and then he went in some whole spiel, some whole long story. He actually told us his whole delusional philosophy. So he had a whole thing about how he was being contacted by UFOs, and he had some whole master idea about what he had like a whole theology around UFOs. And it's funny because I asked my dad about this now, and he doesn't remember it, and I remember it. Like, I was like 14 14, 15, and I was like, this kid is gone. Maybe parents or like older, the older people, they sort of like write that off as just some kid stuff. Just weird. It's true, right? Because they sort of, I would notice in some Boy Scouts a lot of adults had a hard time thinking of their little child as becoming a man, right? So I think maybe to your point, they're like, oh, that's just a kid being a kid, and meanwhile, us like kids becoming adults are like, no, dude, something's wrong here. But like, I'll tell you, I was that jaded to that kind of reaction from the parents that like by the time this is like 2 years in, by the time this kid's giving his weird theology of UFOs and how he's being contacted and all that, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, this is just another thing with this kid, and and then eventually, no joke, it got far enough that he was actually at my high school, and
holy crap,
which was like kind of a bigger urban high school, not so safe for him. And I had kids who didn't even know that I knew him coming up to me saying, "Hey, have you seen this kid? He's like hiding in the bushes and doing weird stuff." And I'm like, "Oh, is his name?" And I won't say his name. Is his name blah blah? Okay, final part of the story.
Yeah.
Fast forward. I'm in my 20s.
Yeah.
I'm at like a park.
Okay.
And he had been institutionalized since then. So they finally figured out, oh, he's schizophrenic. They put him in a home. I'm in a park with my wife, and I see him. He doesn't recognize me. I don't think he would have recognized me anyway.
Yeah.
But he didn't recognize me. I see him with his family. Apparently, he's out on like a day trip.
Okay.
And he is still talking a mile a minute to his dad about the UFOs and the whole thing. And he was just still, like neck deep in that whole thing. So,
damn. Okay. So that's like a regular thing for that kid, because you know what I'm saying? Because if you're talking like just generally at the park, that means you're talking about it like all the time. So could you imagine? Could you imagine being a parent at that point?
Yeah. I mean, at that point, it's pretty sad. I mean, no one would want that for anybody. And the kid, despite this, I'm sure would have been a nice, productive adult had he been normal. But so anyway, it's a long-winded spiel of saying apparently Morgan had been going through some.
Just a quick note here. So I found the pictures. So these are like Morgan's parents, and I guess this is Morgan's father, and he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as well, right?
And
but he managed to handle it, right? He has not really done anything deviant.
Exactly. I mean, which, to be fair, a lot of schizophrenic people don't. I mean, a lot of them.
That's like a stereotype that if you're schizophrenic, you're going to be a serial killer or something like that.
Yeah, because like that guy that shot Congresswoman Giffords here, he was a case of like a paranoid schizophrenic. And they usually only pop up in the news when they do something bad. But truth be told, a lot of them are kind of the opposite, where they're kind of victims of society and live as like homeless people on the streets of our cities because there's not the right system in place to take care of them, and that's a whole other spiel I won't get into. But apparently here's the interesting thing. So apparently, since she was a very young child, she had thought that she was being haunted by ghosts, and that she wasn't telling her parents. She told her parents maybe once that there were ghosts in her room, but she says that I feel like I have done that at least once or twice as well. Yeah, it's a kid thing, right? Yeah. And that's what they wrote it off to, because all kids are scared of the dark and think that there's a ghost in their room, and that's not weird. But here the weird part is, apparently she'd had a longer term delusion up until only a couple years before the Slender Man thing, and then she stopped having it. She had a delusion that out of the corner of her eye, like in the mirror and things like that she could see like a really tall, dark man, like a tall figure that was sort of haunting her and always kind of just out of view. And that's interesting, because that kind of like, you can see where there's kind of an unfortunate coincidence that happens here.
Exactly. Right.
So what happens is, and apparently here's the other thing, she wasn't very popular at school. She didn't have a lot of friends, so that's limited social contact, and some of that may have been because how she was, the depressed affect, not being reactive. I mean, it's not always easy to be a quiet kid, and especially for a girl. I can imagine being quiet and not social can be a massive handicap, especially in the girls' social world.
Yeah, I bet.
So she wasn't that popular. So, but she did have her best friend, our victim
Payton,
here,
right? Yeah. So the girl on the left. Yeah.
Yeah, and then what happened was they had been friends since elementary school, but Anissa came into Morgan's life, and apparently Anissa lived in the same apartment building as Morgan. So as Anissa got Morgan into this Slender Man thing, which is a story about a big, tall, imposing, sinister figure, they started to get very obsessive about the idea, and they eventually built a whole, let's say, their own theology, almost like their version of my scouting friends' UFO theology. They built their own theology that they built a delusion with some level of certainty in their own minds that Slender Man, in fact, did live in a specific place, a specific forest that was 300 miles away in some kind of mythical castle. in the middle of there, and that they were already doomed somehow. Somehow they had already incurred the wrath of this unholy devil figure.
Just another quick interesting fact. Apparently, Slender Man is located in the Nicollet National Forest. I mean, his whereabouts are like his residence, right? So that's
that was what they apparently.
I mean, it's.
Was that? So I'm confused. Was that what they came up with, or is that what the mythology was from the stories?
Not really sure about that. I mean, it's probably something that they came up with, or like maybe people in like in the general area, in the blogs sort of wrote, because Nicollet National Park is located in Wisconsin, so it would make sense that they sort of grown, sort of attached to this idea that they could actually, kill, Payton and then sort of go and live in this mansion.
Yeah, so that was the long and short of it was they came to this delusion that they somehow owed Slender Man this sacrifice of their best friend, who they nicknamed Bella, and that by doing so they would ingratiate themselves with Slender Man, and then they were going to run off and live the rest of their lives in this house and some kind of. But they were never going to see their family again. They thought they were going to walk 300 miles to the forest after committing this act, and that Slender Man was going to help them and welcome them in, which kind of in a way sounds like if I were like a Puritan preacher in the 1600s, I would say, well, that's Satan. That's Satan luring them into his world. They've sold their souls. But I mean, I don't necessarily think that way. But once again, delusional thinking, fantasy world. And then I think to one of the cases we did recently about once again, teen girls trying to kill another teen girl, underestimating the emotional impact and the physical requirements of killing another human being, like just once again almost having like a video game or like a very I almost want to say cosmetic or very very superficial idea of what it is to kill another human being.
Exactly. Definitely that does make sense that these girls have had some sort of mental issues. That the only thing that I can it's like the crazy thing for me, like from the story, and something that really doesn't like quite add up. How do you have two, I guess, girls with like the same or like a very similar mental condition become like friends and actually live in the same apartment building? Doesn't that sound like a crazy coincidence? You have two schizophrenic 12-year-old girls living at the same apartment. That just couldn't end well, right?
I mean, depending where I came from in the political spectrum, I might say, oh, that's a symptom of their socioeconomic status, and clearly there's something in the water or some kind of environmental damage that's causing, these maladies to crop up in young people, and we need to look at that because maybe there's something in the water. Maybe there's, maybe it's just that like poor people have more problems because of the way these things keep piling up on them. So like you're poor, so you live in a bad place that has more pollution, so then you end up with genetic damage and health problems, so then you end up with like a worse life and a worse job, and like this whole like sliding like declining standard of life and consequences as a result of like poverty. That's not me saying it. It's saying like if I were to be like kind of armchair maybe Karl Marx or something, maybe that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm looking at the general like area where the girls actually lived. I'm assuming this is their city. I mean, this is the town that they grew up in. I mean, Wisconsin doesn't necessarily seem like a place where low-income families are located, right? I mean, it's one of the northern states. I mean, it's a rural state, definitely, but they're not necessarily.
Crime rate's low. Yeah.
It seems like a fairly peaceful place to grow up, right?
Yep. Though, you could say, oh, well, the farming, there's a lot of pesticides and stuff. Maybe it's in the groundwater, just like all the lead thing that happened in Flint, Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's I mean, that is the one thing is when you're in a community that's been farming for a long time or doing anything for a long time, maybe you've got chemicals and other things. But this is just me speculating.
I mean, it seems like a fairly, I guess, seems like a fairly cozy, little city. It wasn't like one of the biggest cities. It only had like the population of like 70,000 people. So yeah, it's a fairly small, I guess, city where, once again, how do you have two schizophrenic little girls living in the same apartment building in a town that has only like 70,000 people? That's an odd, like, I guess, thing to happen. But so I guess moving forward with the plot, what actually happened, right? I think we should actually mention the fact. What were you going to mention?
Sorry, one last thing I want to check.
Of
Now
course.
that I beat up on Morgan a little bit about her mental health, I want to have. So as I was doing some digging, and obviously, like I said, people take sides. Okay. So Anissa apparently, well, Morgan, who I really went into, was reported low empathy, the weirdness with the imagination, delusions, etc. Anissa had been known and actually had done some stuff on social media that had potentially marked her as somebody with low empathy as well, and maybe a cruel streak, as well as potentially some psychopathic tendencies. Now, when I mean by psychopathic, I don't mean that like in kind of the pop culture way, like someone that tries to kill someone, though that is what happened. But what I mean is like lower empathy, potentially a depressed affect, just like that, and yeah, the more potentially more manipulative. So that's one of the symptoms of psychopathy. And she apparently had gone on social media and bragged that she had registered on some of the kind of the self-administered psychopathy tests that are available on the internet as showing a high on psychopathic traits.
So she enjoyed the fact that she is psychopathic or something like that.
Yeah, she seemed to relish in it, which makes you wonder if she was chasing it a little bit. So like I said, getting into the case and what happened. Yeah.
I mean, So I guess the attack was planned for like a half a year in advance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Because I've read somewhere that these girls were actually planning on killing her for like 6 months. I mean, you don't really need 6 months to come up with that plan. You know what I'm saying? But like, I guess the 6 months were spent just getting prepared mentally more than like actually preparing like a plan of attack. You know what I'm saying? I feel like the last which one was the episode? I feel like episode
it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, it was like but even that one was like a lot like a lot more better planned, right? Where the two, like, I guess, what was the case called where the two, like, I guess girls who didn't want their, I guess,
secret out in the open,
homosexual relationship to come out or something like that, so they decided to kill their their friend who sort of knew, I guess, of that little secret. And but at least they actually, well, I mean, they were 16, so I mean, you don't really expect 12-year-olds to to be able to kill someone and manage to hide the body, especially when you're schizophrenic and you're not thinking straight. So they're probably it was probably impossible for these girls to actually commit the crime and to actually get away, so
yeah, they certainly didn't do a super great job of it. It is kind of funny though. It is like, to your point, it's like when it's boys, it seems like they kind of half-ass it, throw it together and do it in kind of like a shorter time period, with the exception, of course, of the Columbine people who did plan over a couple of years. But boy, when it's like teenage girls, it's like boy, they do some planning and work together and brainstorm about it a little bit and think of the details, and when they're a little bit older, I mean, like I said, these are 12-year-olds, so they did kind of a crap job of it. But boy, 16-year-olds do a much better job. I guess.
I mean, of course, I mean, these girls, from what I've gathered, they didn't even like have a concrete plan of action of how to even like get away. I feel like they really assumed that after that they would like be contacted by the Slender Man, and they would go and move to like, to like the where to the Nicolette National Forest in his mansion. I mean, it's definitely something.
It's like something that would come out of a little kid, right? Like we're gonna, I'm gonna do this thing, and then we're all gonna go to heaven, like that. It's very and like so yeah. I mean, they actually celebrated. I think it was Morgan's birthday just a couple days before that. They had a nice sleepover where they're eating Cheetos in bed, and they're hanging out and then playing on their iPads. And then the next morning, the Morgan's mother makes them donuts and strawberries, and they're having such a nice time. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, they had actually planned to kill Payton that night and decided she looked too peaceful and that they were too tired. So they said, we'll put it off to tomorrow. She can have one more nice night alive. And then the next day, they have their nice breakfast, and they're like, let's go off to the park. And it's interesting because I read that apparently Morgan's parents normally did not let her go to the park unaccompanied, which kind of blew my mind, even this day and age, because I'm like, wow, a 12-year-old girl her parents won't let her go to the park nearby alone. And that makes me wonder if maybe they're not
still fairly rational, but I guess a little too overprotective,
a little, which kind of, I kind of wonder if maybe they did know something was wrong with their kid. And this is where I have a little bit of a bone to pick with people that have, let's say, mentally ill family members, where like if you have a concern about the public at all, it's like, I get it, it's not your fault, it's not the person didn't bring this on themselves, but at the same point you have to be protective of other people. So
exactly. Makes sense. Right, so moving, I guess, even further with the story. So this all happened in 2014 on May 30th. So as you mentioned, they decided not to carry out the attack on Payton's birthday because quote unquote they were too tired and too groggy. So just to that end, it just shows how nonchalant these girls were about killing Payton, that like, I'm too tired, let's do it tomorrow. Okay. And they were like, let's do it tomorrow, or something like that.
You know what? I think if I were Slender Man, I'd be a little insulted. I'd be like, that's not the kind of dedication Slender Man expects from his minions.
From
like
his proxies.
Right? What
from
the hell?
Proxies.
You're not getting from his proxies, exactly. You're not getting the best bedroom in the mansion now because of that.
Right.
24 hours is a lot of difference.
Right. So the actual attack happened in David's park, right? So it was a nearby forest. Let me just bring up that real quick on the map. Let's just look how I guess it looks. So it's right, so it was like somewhere around here. So it was like still a they didn't even go like far into the forest. They sort of really, I guess, expected that they are 12-year-olds. They can't really logistically get anywhere far from somewhere where they could hide the body. It's a hard place to actually kill someone and hide the body. I guess Wisconsin, because even though it's rural, it still has a lot of like infrastructure, and I don't really see a lot of like, and you have Milwaukee nearby. It's like you really have to go like I guess further to the west, to the I guess Ottawa areas or something like that. But I guess these girls were just like probably that David's Park was probably like the furthest like area they could like go unattended. You know what I'm saying? Like when you were like a 12-year-old, I don't know if you had this, but I remember like having like these like strict boundaries. I'm not sure, probably when I was 12 I didn't have them already, but like when I was 8 and when I was like 9, like I knew like how many blocks I can like go like away from like where I was living, because then my parents would like be sort of like they like sort of forbade me to like leave, like the general vicinity of like my neighborhood, right? So this was probably like the furthest, I guess, area the girls could actually go by themselves. Right, so the crazy part is, right, so they get to the area where they actually do the killing, and if I'm correct, Anissa was the one that said stab her and go ballistic or something, something along those lines, and but she actually didn't do the stabbing, right? Morgan was the one who was doing, I guess, the heavy lifting, and Anissa was more like, I believe both of them had like blades out, kitchen knives and things like that, but I guess Anissa just couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like she was too scared or something like that. So I guess this also plays a big fact, because Anissa's level of schizophrenia was probably not as developed as Morgan's was, because Morgan seemed like it was nothing to her. It really seemed like it was just, her own words, necessary to do.
Like once again, it's like, is this even real?
Right.
Is Payton even real? And but right before that, the other thing that was kind of crazy was, like you said, that their whole idea of what was going to happen when they killed Payton was pretty half formed. It was like originally they were going to kill her in Morgan's own house. So they were like, oh, we're gonna kill her during the sleepover and chuck the covers over her head and run, and Slender Man's gonna we're gonna have the Slender Man rapture and somehow end up at his mansion, and then the next version was, well, we're gonna go to the park and we're gonna kill her in the bathroom because there's drains in the bathroom that'll hide the blood, but it's like it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't.
Nothing makes any sense.
Like who cares about the blood if you're not hitting the anyway? Like how are you gonna? They didn't push it out. So here's the other thing that kind of blew my mind when I was reading the details was, at one point they try to knock out before they go into the forest. At the park, they slam Payton's head into the concrete to try to knock her out. And like you would think at that point, like play date is over. Like, all right, I'm gonna go home. You two just try to break my head open. But no. Like they still, and that's where I gotta wonder. Like, poor Payton. She was friends with these two losers, and I mean losers not in like a pejorative sense, but like literally like two people that are not doing well in life, and clearly were destined for not great things at this point. And it makes you wonder. Once again, and I'm saying this as someone who, has had my own struggles with like friendships that haven't been that great, or maybe some level of desperation at some points in my life for friends, or like you're willing to put up with a lot when you're being treated badly already. And sometimes I read a quote one time from someone that had been abused. They said that you learn to be abused not from your enemies but by your friends and family. So
okay. That's actually a really good quote. That actually a deep quote. I never really thought about it that way, but it would make sense that Payton probably could have gotten some better a better set of friends than that. But wait, have I missed this? They actually slammed her head like to the ground, and they were like, it was just an accident. Let's go deeper into the forest.
They're like, hey, you know what would be even better than that, what we just did to you? Let's go play hide and go seek. Don't you want to come in the dark? And apparently she didn't want to go, but she went anyway. So that makes me think like this was maybe somebody that was used to, once again, not super high quality interactions with both her friends and just think if your friend's treating you like that.
I would say this is a pretty weird way to react to your head getting smashed to the ground. I mean, but right. So I mean, they go deeper into the forest, and what happens then? They sort of pull out the knife.
Time.
Yeah, stabby time. So I mean, 19 times, and you can't really kill someone. I feel like that's that's almost like 50 Cent. He got shot like 9 times and still survived. So I guess these things just happen. Some people, I mean, you look at the movies, right? You see one stab wound to like the pelvic area, and it's over, right? The person dies, bleeds out, and how do you stab someone 19 times? And I mean, I don't know. That's. I mean, maybe that's just like what 12-year-olds like. I mean, 12-year-olds probably can't do that much of a good job at stabbing someone. They just sort of think that it happens naturally. But if Anissa actually was also stabbing Payton, I don't think Payton would have made it out. If you had two girls stabbing, then you would have like at close to like at least 40 stab wounds at that point. I don't think you can survive 40 stab wounds. You just have to be Iron Man at that point. So but Payton actually managed to survive, and she actually crawled I guess towards where the people were, where someone actually spotted her. So this is just shows like how close they were to like to like actual population, to like actual other people when they did the stabbing, so that Payton could actually crawl towards them. So it just shows that these girls were really, they didn't care about the outcome. You know what I'm saying? Like the consequences. They only they only cared about the outcome. They didn't care about the consequences, right? The only thing was in their minds, like they're gonna kill Payton, and that's it. They're gonna live in that national park or whatever. But like, wait, what are like the next moves after they kill Payton? Do they immediately expect Slender Man to appear? Did they just stand there and after a while they realize maybe it's gonna take a little while, let's go back home, Simpsons is on or something?
I mean, it sounded like, they made some level of preparations. Like they had a couple of water bottles, they had some food. I know they like for 300 miles they had 2 water bottles. And Perfect. They literally 300 miles they had like snacks, granola bars or something. And they actually made it 5 miles, which was pretty interesting. I was like, 5 miles hike is not bad. That's like a for 2 12-year-old girls, it's probably a couple hours walk. But then at some point they get tired and they're like, dude, Slender Man is not kicking in right now. Like, is this working out so well? Like, I don't know. And then the cops come upon them, and the cops are like, hey, how's it going? What's going on? And they're like, oh, we just tried to kill somebody and it didn't really work out, or
it seems like that was like the case. And could you imagine like the cops' reaction? I wouldn't take these girls serious, would you? Like,
no, it was like especially when you look at the kind of expressions in their face and the pictures we have, where like one just looks like a total space case, where it's kind of shocking that no one at any point was like taking the parents aside and saying, look, I don't know if your kid's all there, and more so than like the normal kind of teenage kid. But and then the other kid just looks kind of insidious, and they don't the victim is like the most emotive looking one of the bunch, or the most normal looking one.
Looks very normal, right? Payton looks really normal.
But that looks like a I want to please you smile, not in like a bad way. I mean in like a I really want approval from somebody. That's what that smile looks like.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, but Anissa, Payton actually, she seems to be doing well these days. She actually did that whole show, and she, as you've mentioned before, she has took an interest in medicine, right? So.
Yeah.
The only thing I want to mention here is like it shows like that Payton is actually a really cool person to actually having gone through all of that and still seem to doing well in life. I mean that's crazy, because I would assume for most people it's really hard to bounce back, because people get traumatized for a lot less than 19 stab wounds, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna honestly. I feel like after this show, I'm gonna show my daughter, who's like who's 9 right now. I'm gonna show her pictures of these girls and say, "You see these two? This is like these two are bad news. Like if you're getting like any kind of vibe and getting treated like that by people like this, this is not a good. That's sort of my lesson as a parent.
I mean, that's a good lesson, I would say, because But I mean, can you actually notice? I mean, you definitely noticed, that kid from like the Boy Scouts. So.
Yeah, I tell you, it was so odd, because I feel like, and once again, like when you're like, 13, 14, 15, especially back then, there was no internet. So like we didn't really know anything about schizophrenia. We just knew the kid was pretty weird in a way that was like, We had weird kids in the troop and eccentric kids in the troop for sure. Kids with ADHD, kids with, behavioral issues, kids that, were definitely not like good in other ways. But this kid was on a totally different level where, between, just the delusions and odd behavior. And I mean, even just not seeming to be all there. And then also later on, they have the trial, and apparently during the trial is where Morgan's schizophrenia, probably especially because she started having major environmental changes. So I'll give you a case in point. My parents had a neighbor who developed Alzheimer's at a pretty young age, and I think it wasn't really evident until she moved. She changed residences to someplace that was still in the area, but just not the same house. And her Alzheimer's went full blown, and she completely lost her mind and was dead within 5 years.
Holy crap.
At the age of like 60. And this is someone that used to jog every day. This is someone who's in perfect shape. Yeah. And, a change of environment. So that's what happened. So she was institutionalized right away. Apparently she wasn't getting medication, which is interesting because I think it depends on the state. So I'll tell you, in some states, when you have a mental illness and you commit a crime, they'll actually put you on medication to make you well again, and then they'll put you on trial and maybe convict you for the thing you did when you were crazy.
Jesus.
Well, like I think in her case it was kind of the opposite, where it doesn't really.
Yeah, I feel like everyone
she wasn't
was
really
sort of leaning towards her being a schizophrenic because it was. I feel like it was super obvious. So it's not like you can, I think that the Anissa's case was a little bit like iffy, But
she was more manipulative, apparently, even at the mental institution or the jail that they were initially at. Even though they were separated, she was trying to throw Morgan under the bus and say the evil Morgan did it. And she seems like she may be actually not just have this schizotypal personality disorder. She may have some degree of psychopathy and sociopathy, where she may take joy or pleasure in doing cruel and maybe manipulative things with other people. So like one of the articles I read was kind of coming out against her and portraying Morgan as more of the victim, where she said Morgan was essentially in like a windowless facility for like a year. She couldn't touch her parents anymore. You could have no physical contact with your visitors. And that was when at some point when she was finally out of that, she didn't want to be touched anymore. She decided that she didn't recognize her parents anymore. She was clearly in a much deeper state of schizophrenia and a much lower level of functioning than she was apparently earlier when she did the crime. So like the trial is interesting. So apparently the trial was much more controversial than Wikipedia depicts it, where apparently Anissa had the trial first, went to trial first, and the defense attorney apparently did what was thought to be a pretty risky and wild defense strategy around how he depicted. Like, he didn't actually depict his client as mentally ill, but he said that his client interacting with Morgan made her do things that a mentally ill person would do, so therefore she wasn't responsible for it. And much to the surprise of Payton's parents and really the general population of Waukesha, Wisconsin, and the state at large, the jury bought it. So this is probably one of those, stupid juries, unfortunately, where
that seems really wacky. You know what I'm saying? Like, could you imagine yourself being a 12-year-old and having like this crazy kid who sort of implies that you should kill another one of your friends to go and live in like the national park area, and you're just like, let's do this, man.
And here's the other thing is, and this is where it gets a little, and I know we're already kind of at going a little longer than we normally do. Wisconsin is one of the states that back in the 80s and 90s had lowered the age that a child could be tried as an adult for like a major crime. This was in reaction to some theories, and I don't. Like, even though these theories supposedly have been disavowed, I'll tell you, I'm like, even though I'm a politically moderate person, I'm kind of a big law and order person, and we have seen a lot of some degree of children who are raised, let's say, in bad environments or neglectful or abusive environments, who have done things that are pretty darn awful. And I think that there is a reason why those laws exist, because it's really frustrating when, let's say, someone this age does something really horrible, and they can only be this happened with actually some of the early school shooters before Columbine. About a year or two before Columbine, there were a 12 and a 13-year-old that did a big school shooting, killed a teacher, shot up a bunch of other kids. Jeez. And the most the state could do was hold them till they were 18. And everybody kind of lost their minds, or like, WTF, like that doesn't seem right.
I mean, okay. that's there are definitely weird. Like, I mean, when you have a country as big as the United States, with so many public interests involved, because everyone has money and everyone can sort of have their own little power projections going on in such a massive country, you will have those strange laws being made, and these strange, I guess, set of rules that are that to a casual person would seem completely out of the question, but when you look at the big picture, I mean, just given the size of America, you will always find weird laws like that in every state, or some sort of a weird structure of I guess the law or something like that.
Yeah, 50 different states and thousands of different sensibilities, I guess, about things. Just as like you said. Yeah, so and I think that the controversy, the kind of the back and forth on that is, like a punishment, or let's say a consequence, a legal consequence. Mm-hmm. Part of it is about punishment. Part of it's sort of the moral, you did something bad. Now we do something to you, to maybe discourage other people from doing that if they can be rational about it. But B, like in the case of imprisonment or even execution, you're protecting the public good in some way. So you're saying, hey, guess what? We're going to respect the rights of everyone else by restricting or eliminating your rights to do something. So in this case, even though there was a lot of controversy about them being charged as adults, this and that, long story short, both of them ended up, so Anissa was found not guilty, and then Morgan was kind of looking at potentially up to 65-year jail sentence. In case of both of them, what they both earned essentially was extensive court mandated psychiatric care for the next 25 to 40 years, depending on which person it was. So, and then even after that, kind of like the psychological version of probation. So, I
mean, for the rest of their lives, right? I mean, you can't.
Until they're like older than me, and I'm 43. So, I mean, in theory, they're supposed to be watched and guarded over. I think if Payton had died, maybe there would be stronger feelings about this. So, I'll give you an example. The guy who shot Ronald Reagan, he's up for, I think he's been able to walk out of his home and be out in the open and have day visits and things day trips and things. And people are like, well, he tried to kill Reagan and he crippled another person. He maimed this person. This person never got full use of their lives. And it's well, what? So he's crazy, but he still has this freedom. But then somebody who had a couple ounces of marijuana in the wrong state, they're in jail for the rest of their lives. It doesn't seem right.
I mean, definitely seems like a weird, I guess what I'm trying to say is what do you think would be the correct I guess punishment for Morgan and Anissa at this point? Do you think that what they got is too easy, or do you think they got what they deserved?
So it's interesting because when you look at sort of the legal stuff around that, so funny enough, some of the comments after Anissa's verdict, when she was found not guilty by insanity, they're like, oh, yeah, when you have money, it's funny how it's insanity. But when you don't have money, because someone else was commenting, look, murder itself is an insane act. So, by that argument, everybody is insane. Now,
exactly, right? That's.
I mean, I would argue a great many of people in jail, in prison, right now, have an actual mental issue. There's something called antisocial personality disorder,
of course,
a big amount of people that it's something
definitely
3% of the population, which probably means 6% or more of the male population, or probably actually much higher since males are overrepresented. But anyway, I would say, unfortunately, prisons in this country, and I'm sure in other countries, are like almost like a proxy for like institutionalizing mentally ill people. It's just, it does seem like there's a great many people that like literally, and you see this, that's why we made the 3 strikes law in California, like literally cannot control themselves. Like literally, if they get out of jail, it's only a matter of time, not just out of financial necessity or things like that. Literally, it's like some other driving force, or maybe lack of IQ, lack of intellect, lack of self-control, something. Yeah. Something it allows them to do things that we find antisocial.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah. That you and I don't necessarily do. Like you and I may be tempted in a fit of anger to do something, and maybe someday we will. Knock on wood, we don't. But,
hopefully not. But
hopefully not. But you never know. I mean, things happen. That's why there's crimes of passion. People understand that like a fit of anger is almost like temporary insanity, right? And I think there's some understanding of that. I think that the line is like, what do you do with somebody who's not safe to be around? And like in this case, I would say, they both seem fairly mentally ill. I would say one more than the other, but even the more manipulative one.
It's still insane, right? It's still a threat to society, regardless of anything. Right. I mean, so I guess in closing, the last thing I think we need to or at least I want to hear your take on. What do you think? How long do you think these girls will actually serve? Because I sort of have a feeling that because. For another case we could definitely do in the future, there was this case where this girl sort of in Canada, she was like 14, she had like this 20-something-year-old boyfriend who sort of came to the house and killed her whole family just because the family members didn't want her to be with the boyfriend, and so she got sentenced to a whole bunch of years, but then she got released a lot earlier with a different identity. So don't you think that the same thing is gonna happen in this case, where Morgan and Anissa will actually get out earlier than they were sentenced for, and just live their lives with different identities? Don't you think this is sort of going to happen? I mean, with Morgan probably not, but with Anissa, don't you think that that's what the case is going to be?
Yeah, I agree, and I'll even go farther. That I'll say, I'm going to predict. I'm just going to make a wild prediction. I'm going to say Anissa is going to get out in either her late 20s or early 30s, and Morgan's going to get out maybe mid 30s. And I would give a 25% chance that one of them is going to do something again, because we've actually seen. We've actually seen it with some of the cases I mentioned. The 2 kids that shot up the school. One of them's dead now, but they'd been in legal problems. And there was another one. It was a famous case where a kid killed a child he was babysitting, and there was a whole argument around back and forth about his conviction and whether he was only I think 10 or something, about whether he could be held responsible. And then it turned out he violated his parole and did some more stuff, and now he's back in jail, I think, until his 40s. So I feel like
there's a chance, right? There's a chance that this is gonna happen again. Right. So since we're closing, I just want to mention the fact that it's really interesting doing these types of shows with you in terms of where the children actually perform all of these crazy crimes, because we can actually delve deeper into the psychology of these kids, and you seem like you are really knowledgeable in the psychology of children. I guess that's because you're a parent or something like that, Glenn. So it was it's really interesting to discuss these topics with you.
Thank you. I think psychology has been a little pet hobby of mine, and I think sometimes I for sure go a little too long and too hard on it. But it's been one of those things where maybe sometimes you also try to self-diagnose, and then sometimes it's just the same reason why we're doing a true crime podcast is these things are fascinating. The human mind is fascinating, and even sometimes an accident, a train wreck, is fascinating, and these are certainly psychological train wrecks.
Exactly. I mean, that's a good way to put it. So, I guess this was episode 19, the Slender Man Stabbing. That's what we're going to be naming this episode. And, before we sign out, anything you want to mention to the audience? Maybe like give your own little like happy holidays or something like that?
Yeah, happy holidays. It's great to be alive and healthy. I hope all of you are as well. I'm looking forward. We've seen the subscriber count climb just steadily, so we're really happy. Just stay safe. Watch out for the Slender Man, and thank you for making it this far.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's been a longer episode, so guys, as Glenn mentioned, happy holidays. I hope everyone enjoys their time with, their family members and friends during the Christmas and Christmas Eve. And then also, if we don't end up making an episode before the New Year's, happy New Year's to everyone who's going to be celebrating that. And yeah, guys, this was episode 19, the Slender Man Stabbing. So catch us on the next episode. It's going to be episode 20, so it's going to be almost like another, I guess, milestone episode for us. Maybe we will decide to do something special for it. I don't know yet, but yeah, guys, I guess as always, stay safe, and we'll catch you on episode number 20. So peace out.